Hello and welcome to Full Oversteer, the home of Formula One podcast from now on. I'm joined by Tyler Rowlinson, sports journalist at GRV Media. So, Tyler, without further ado, we're going to get stuck straight into the Singapore Grand Prix weekend. It was a fascinating 62 laps of Marina Bay yesterday. And we're going to kick it off with a bit about Daniel Ricciardo. It might have been his last race. One, what was your take on his performance? And two, do you think it's the end of the road for him in Formula One?
Yeah, well, it does seem that way, doesn't it? After that race, it seemed from the way he was talking to the press after the race, it seemed like that it was going to be it. He was very emotional. It was really sad to see actually him talk about his F1 career like that for the first time. His performance, it wasn't a great showing, was it really? Yuki, well, I think Red Bull, well, RB in general, really just struggled. It was another difficult race for them in what has been a very inconsistent season for them. But Ricardo did kind of just fall away, didn't he, for most of the race? It was a very difficult afternoon for him. Got the fastest lap of the race at the end of it, which obviously has built a dent into Lando Norris's title challenge, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But yeah, it was. I mean, it does seem that way now, doesn't it? That it is going to be the end. There's been obviously rumblings and rumours about Liam Lawson. I think we know that. I think it's known that Lawson is going to get the seat next year, but there's obviously been this rumour about that it could be gone now. And from the way Ricardo was talking to Lawrence Binotto and the Sky F1 crew, it does look like that it is the end of the road, which is a real shame when all things considering that he's had such a brilliant career in Formula One over the years. I've been an avid personal fan of him when he was at Red Bull and did such a great job at Renault. McLaren was a bit of a torrid time for him, and since he's returned back from the AlphaTauri and now RB setup, it just hasn't gone to plan. So it's a real shame to see it end the way that it is ending, which it seems like that it will be. But I think probably for the team to get Lawson into the car to build for the future, perhaps it is the best decision for the team.
Yeah, I think one of the most telling things was perhaps the emotions that Kim Illman, the renowned photographer in the paddock, described after Sunday evening. In fact,
Yeah.
early hours into Monday morning by the time Ricardo left, it was maybe about 1:30 in the morning, and he visibly had said a lot of goodbyes to people. We saw some of the guests in the paddock of the Visa Cash App RB team that had given him a guard of honour at some point as well. So all the signs are there, sadly, that indicate that he might be on his way out before the United States Grand Prix. Doesn't even make it to the end of the year. But that also does open other doors at the end of the day for Ricardo. You know, IndyCar, he said he was scared of it. Will Buxton said he would love for him to get over his fear of it. You never know, he might get there one day. But he did say he loves NASCAR. So North America could very much be an option for Ricardo in the future. The seasons are pretty much coming to an end out there. Obviously, NASCAR's got about six more races, and it is the playoffs of the Cup Series. You've got
Yeah.
an IndyCar that has just wrapped up. So if he does want to make a move across the pond, he's got a bit of time to make that decision and to prepare himself for it. Staying within the Red Bull stable, we had what was starting off to be a pretty tricky weekend for Max Verstappen and Red Bull on Friday that turned into an okay weekend in the end. They got second. They did exactly what they needed in this championship race, and they were aided by Ricardo himself, as you mentioned, with that fastest lap point. Just how important could that point be come the end of the year?
I mean, it is already huge when you look at the fact that it's been said about on social media all over the place that Max can now afford to finish second behind Lando in every race and sprint races, regardless of the fastest lap bonus, and still win the championship. So, I mean, that in itself just shows how important that it is. And as you said there, Verstappen did exactly really what he needed to do in Singapore. I mean, we knew that Norris was the guy to beat, the car to beat McLaren, just so fast around there. And Red Bull did show that Max anyway did show some good pace, consistent pace, and he did as you said, exactly what he needed to do and picked up the scraps to keep himself in within the title fight and now in a seemingly pretty good position to maintain that thanks to Ricardo. And he obviously had the radio message at the end of the race thanking Daniel, which again kind of adds to the facade or the feeling that Ricardo is gone. But yeah, overall pretty solid weekend for Max, and Red Bull, as you said, did exactly what they needed to do. The Constructors' Championship, I think, is probably far gone now at this point, but the Drivers' Championship, for him now, he's probably in the best possible position. The only thing he needs to not afford to do is fall even further behind that, or in the worst case, suffer a retirement in these next six races.
Yeah, so another man that is really actually under pressure, not just for Verstappen, is again Sergio Perez, sadly. It looked like he kind of bucked the trend of recent times at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix with an excellent performance. which ended again with a bit of a, let's say, disappointing, really. And there's no other word to describe crashing out on the final lap. It was absolutely gutting for him, as I'm sure it was for Carlos Sainz
Yeah.
as well. But he just seemed to lose all the progress that he'd made before, again at the Singapore Grand Prix, qualifying 13th and finishing 10th. I know it's a tricky track to overtake at, but only gaining three positions in a Red Bull car that Max Verstappen has just finished second in is, I don't think it's quite up to scratch. And again, a lot of people have been saying that if they don't end up winning the constructors or at least be in the battle for it at the end of the year, it's all down to him. While I don't think that's entirely true, I do think that the more and more these or more and more of these performances that do happen, the more and more he puts himself at risk of not being in that stable for 2025. What's your take on it?
I mean, the fact is that those performances is they're not just they're not just a one-off thing. They are a regular occurrence, and that's unfortunate. As you said there, Max managing to finish second, and Perez is finishing behind Haas. Hulkenberg finished ahead of him. He only narrowly beat Franco Colapinto in his third race in a Williams, which just goes to show. He's eight. I mean, he's eighth in the championship. I mean, yeah, it's a big factor as to why Red Bull have missed out on the constructors. But then again, at the same time, Red Bull have been off the pace now compared to the likes of McLaren, Ferrari, and Mercedes for a couple of months now. So to take a little bit of pressure off of Perez there, the team have underperformed by their standards, especially from last season. But Perez has performed consistently in a bad way, isn't in a not a good way, and he's carried on those performances from last year, which is a big concern, especially when the team, all the rumours surrounding Verstappen and his future, which has gone on throughout the season. And I mean, obviously they've signed Perez to a deal to 2026, which I think is only simply to give them a bit of continuity, considering that Adrian Newey's gone, Jonathan Wheatley's going to Audi, and then the rumours surrounding Verstappen's future. He is under a lot of increasing pressure. And when you hear what Christian Horner was saying, I think it was on the Friday. He was saying that we're looking at the options for 2025. He was talking about, looking at George Russell when his contract runs out at Mercedes. So it does indicate that Perez will be gone at least by 2026. He won't be in the car by then. Whether Red Bull decide to pull the trigger now, which you could very much argue that they probably should be doing and probably should have done last season, based off his performances, because he narrowly scraped second in the championship last year, and it was very, very tight, but he got there in the end. But he finished more than double the amount of points behind his teammate. So he is under increasing pressure, and the longer that these performances continue, yes, Singapore is a difficult track. It's a track where strategy plays a big factor. It's very hot. The tyres are degrading significantly, but to finish 10th when your teammate is second and behind the likes of Hulkenberg. No disrespect to Hulkenberg because he had a very good weekend. But the longer these performances continue, the harder it is to justify him being in that Red Bull seat next year.
Yeah, I mean, you look at how far McLaren have come, and also at the development of Oscar Piastri, who is a young driver and is not in the same boat as Perez by any means, but he's backed up his team really well, and even through adversity, has found ways to improve at times when he's been off the pace of Lando Norris. So McLaren won by 20 seconds on Sunday. That was the second biggest winning margin of the season. Just a few races ago, Lando Norris and Andrea Stella came out in the media and said, we can do what Sebastian Vettel and Red Bull did in 2013 and win the last nine races in a row. Well, they can't do that anymore. What is the possibility of them winning the next seven, let's say, Tyler, and making it eight in a row to round the season off and to win the title?
But there's a very good opportunity for that because McLaren, well, they do have the fastest package. That's clear to see. And you look at the final six races, they are quite beneficial to McLaren. I think Austin is a track that they could benefit from with the long straights and the fast corners. And obviously, it's a very high speed track, I think, and one that I think McLaren could definitely benefit from. But they are the team to beat at the moment. And obviously, there is I think that. I think they've got the Constructors' Championship wrapped up. I think Ferrari, they could potentially get there because they do also have the pace. They've proven that. But I think they had a pretty shocking weekend in Singapore overall, which has dealt a massive dent to that. So I think McLaren, I think it would be a massive disaster for them to not walk away with the Constructors' Championship now. With the Drivers' Championship, I think that it's solely dependent on Norris being able to keep that focus. We saw in Singapore that he did have a couple off moments. He hit the wall twice, was lucky to not take himself out of the race from his own accord from a lack of concentration. So there is that to potentially be worried about whether he can keep that focus. But that's the thing. He is now in a position where he has to just win every race from now on. Can he do that? I, it's on the cards. I would say that it is on the cards that he can do it, but it's obviously going to be very difficult because he's got to keep Max behind him, and obviously with the papaya rules, what's going on? Obviously, Piastri's going to want to race. He's going to want to keep pushing. So McLaren do need to make a firm decision, and probably what they haven't done already, and that Piastri does need to start supporting Norris into a more bigger extent. But I think that McLaren, as I said, they have the package, they've got the tools, they've got the drivers to do it. They just need to make sure they keep Max behind them. And Ricciardo getting the fastest lap in Singapore and taking that cushion from him to the point where Max can afford to finish second behind Norris and still win the championship. He has to really push and I guess rely on a little bit of luck to hope that Max does have some misfortune in one of these next six races.
Yeah, it's really all up in the air, and it's actually really finely poised when you think about it. Because I was thinking about it earlier, actually myself, and I realised that a DNF either way would kind of tilt the title in one another's favour. For McLaren, that would put them probably too far behind, and a lot would
Yeah.
be left on Red Bull to perform badly. While if Red Bull to retire, the gap would all of a sudden be, just over more than a race win, and they would kind of be forced to try something different. Whether that's with the setup of the car, with an upgrade. So it's going to be really difficult for them. And we're going to move on to someone else that's been really impressive actually lately. Now, while Lando Norris has been, incredible this year and has started to take race wins, Franco Colapinto has been in the sport a whole lot less than him. And he put an absolutely lovely move on three different drivers into turn one on Sunday. Just what did you make of that huge, huge lunge into turn one? Almost like well, I've got nothing to lose here. Let's just send it.
Exactly. It's just phenomenal, isn't it? He's only been here for what? This is his third race and he's already got the confidence to do that. That's something that Logan Sargent, who he's replaced, would never never in any conceivable way would have tried that. It's unbelievable, and it hints to what Colapinto's been. He has been very impressive since coming in. Let's not get this wrong. I mean, to go from 18th to 12th in Monza is impressive. His first points in Azerbaijan, although a little bit lucky considering Sainz and Perez's retirement, but to finish eighth in a Williams was very, very, very impressive. And obviously Albon to finish seventh as well, very good haul of points for Williams, and then to just miss out on the points in Singapore. He's one of the major talking points of the paddock at the moment. And the fact that he's only 21, this is his first proper taste of F1. It won't be in the Williams car next year with Sainz going to Williams alongside Albon. It's a great these drivers when they come in on short-term deals, they just have nothing to lose, and there's just this bit of confidence that comes out of them. And we're just seeing just how good they can be. And Colapinto is obviously now being linked with the Sauber seat. Whether he could get that is another question. But it's just been so impressive, and it's been a real joy to see him come in. And it shows that these F2 drivers, when given the opportunity, and Ollie Behrman the same thing, when they are given that chance short term, they just have nothing to lose and they just go for it. And I'm absolutely loving him at the moment. And long may it continue. I really hope he can score more points in the Williams because I mean, the car has improved the last few weeks to the point where they can now compete for points. And Colapinto has proven that he can score points regularly, unlike what Sargent managed, 1 point in 36 races. Like, as I said, there was absolutely no way that Sargent would have been able to have pulled off that move in Singapore or even score points. So well done to Colapinto, and long may that continue.
Well, I think when you think about it, he's all of a sudden become a definite player in the 2026 driver market because it looks like he's
Absolutely.
not quite going to be able to find himself a drive for 2025. With the kind of strange view on the outside looking in from how well he did perform this weekend, he was, not comfortably, but was ahead of Alex Albon. Is there a bit of pressure on him now, especially going into 2025, that, Colapinto's been in the Williams young driver stable for a while. They've got a long-term contract with Sainz. Um, you know, if Albon or Sainz, to be fair, either one of them, considering that they only have deals to the end of 2026, I believe, maybe 2027,
Hmm.
could either one of themselves, find them reluctant or in a position where if things don't go well, James Vowles might have to make another tough decision.
Well, that's the thing. That's why Vowles wants to keep Colapinto within the Williams Academy. I remember covering something earlier on last week, and Vowles was saying that Colapinto will stay in the Williams Academy regardless of anything or where he does end up. So if he does get the Sauber seat, he'll be going on loan from Williams by the sounds of it. That's according to what I can read from what James Vowles is saying. So he clearly has faith in Colapinto. Obviously, otherwise he wouldn't have given him the seat in place of Sargent. And with the performances that he is putting in, and he is making himself known that he can in a competent car. So if Sainz, I mean, you would imagine that Sainz would become, I mean, obviously it's a difficult move for Sainz moving from Ferrari to Williams because ultimately it is a slower package. And Albon has been well established there for a long time. The fact that Colapinto is already close to and can beat Albon, as well, difficult to say in Singapore because obviously Albon had that issue and he retired, but Colapinto can be competitive alongside Albon. If either one of them struggles to perform in 2025, which could be a possibility because Williams probably up until now haven't really been anywhere in terms of scoring points regularly. Albon's got a few, but not really as consistent as he probably was able to do last year. If either one of them can't perform next year, Colapinto could find himself in a position where if he does get the Sauber seat, and that is a very big possibility, Vowles may go, maybe I will have to recall him from Sauber because Sauber at the moment, they are firmly glued to the back of the grid and probably look set to do the same thing next year. Vowles probably won't want him lingering around in that team for much longer, even if it is a 2-year deal and he does end up at Audi, which many would think that it would take a massive leap forward. But it's a very interesting one. It's a very interesting one. It'll be one to keep an eye on for sure if things do go south there. I think Vowles he's proven himself that he can make a difficult decision. Obviously, with what happened in Australia when he pulled Sargent out and when Albon crashed and broke his chassis and gave Sargent's chassis, and then obviously dropping Sargent completely, he can make those tough decisions. And who's to say that he won't do it again?
Yeah, I think, looking elsewhere, and as you mentioned, Audi, it's the guys on 1-year contracts next year that could be under real pressure. It looks like Valtteri Bottas looks set to be retained by Audi. And you've got Jack Doohan on a 1-year contract with Alpine next year. What's to stop them from going outside of their pool? So, there's going to be a lot of stake next year. It's the final year of the technical regulations. It's normally when we see the closest and the best racing action all the time. So watch out for guys like that that are going to be under pressure and guys like that that could have nothing to lose while taking that year out, whether their Colapinto goes back to Formula 2. Winning the Formula 2 title would certainly be a huge statement if that's somewhere where he has to end up in the end.
Absolutely.
Finally, for today, we are going to talk about what has ended up being, a terribly long streak. And I can't remember in the last, I don't think, maybe 15 years that I've watched Formula One, where there was the last time that there wasn't even a safety car in 9 races. I mean, we've gone through stints before where I've gone, there hasn't been a red flag in 20 races, which, that's fair enough because, they're rare occurrences. But a safety car? I mean, every single Singapore Grand Prix in history, dating back to 2008, has had a safety car in it. And yet we ball up, having not had one for 8 races, and the streak continues. I mean, do you have any explanation for that, Tyler?
I honestly can't tell you, to be honest. I mean, Singapore has always been that track that catches drivers out with the close walls. And obviously, we go back to when it was his first race in 2008 with the Singapore chicane that always notoriously used to catch drivers out. I was just watching there, sitting watching the action, and just you could tell that the teams were petrified of the possibility of there being a safety car because they didn't want to pull the trigger and go into the pits. And then, because obviously Singapore is a massive race in terms of strategy, they didn't want to pull the trigger and go, all right, let's box in threat that there was an accident and then suddenly they're far behind and then there wasn't one. It's just I actually cannot pinpoint the reason as to why that is the case, and it was just unbelievable. And I think many people probably were sitting there watching that race thinking come on, does a safety car just come out? And we did come close a couple of times. Magnussen had a puncher, he could have gone off and into an unsafe area and there could have been a safety car there. Norris could have binned it in the wall, there could have been one there, but there just wasn't one. And it's just ridiculous. I've never known a streak like it, to go this far without a safety car. And who's to say the streak won't continue going into the next few races? We've got Austin next. I don't know what the record is for safety cars there, but it's just mind blowing how the cars can just stay that I don't know that kind of just stay on track, like how they can just stay on track and there's no sort of cautions pulled out. It's just ridiculous.
It's a huge testament to the reliability of all the teams as well. I think when you look at it,
Yeah.
20 years ago, there were so many retirements from every Formula One race. Historically, it was you never really saw 20 drivers finishing a race, sorry. But that has become way more frequent in the last few years. So, in one way, it's a shame in another way, it's not, because it means we get to see more cars on track, more racing action. At the end of the day, that's exactly why we travel the world, is to go and see Formula One cars racing each other at the top level. Um, but as you mentioned, Austin, Mexico, Brazil coming up. I mean, we've seen safety cars at those places before. They can have chaotic first laps. Obviously, the worst bit about it is that there's 4 more weeks anyways. So it doesn't matter. We're not going to get a safety car for 4 more weeks, which is a shame. But it's also a good place to wrap up today's episode of the Full Oversteer podcast. I've been Shay Rogers, joined by Tyler Rowlinson. Thank you very much for watching, and we will catch you next time.